You know, when we think about how history is made, we usually picture these huge, explosive moments, right? But what if I told you that's not always the case? Sometimes the biggest changes, they happen in total silence. And today, we're going to crack open a forgotten file and uncover one of those stories, a story that was almost lost to time.
I mean, just let that sink in for a second. This case never made the headlines. We're talking no marches, no big famous speeches, not a single mention on the front page. It was this intense legal fight that played out completely in the shadows, almost like it was designed to stay hidden.
But here's the thing. Just because it was quiet, don't for a second think it wasn't powerful. Tucked away in some dusty old archive, buried under all that dense legal jargon of a court file,
That's where you find it. A decision that sent these quiet shockwaves through the entire system, and almost nobody even noticed. This was a ruling that ended up reshaping the rights of so many people. It's a heck of a story. All right, let's get into it. Okay, so to really get the weight of this decision, you have to picture the world it happened in. We're not talking about a big, bustling city here. No. This was a place with its own set of quiet rules, rules that you just did not break.
So let's set the scene. Imagine a small American town right in the middle of the 20th century. Here, segregation isn't just, how things are. It's the actual law. And this is the crucial part. If you dared to challenge that system in any way at all, you were risking everything. We're talking serious punishment, both socially and financially. The stakes were just incredibly high. Now, usually when you hear civil rights battle, your mind probably jumps to famous activists and big national organizations, right? Well, that's not this story. Not at all. This fight was started by folks who never, ever wanted to be in the spotlight. The people who took this on, it was just a working Black family and their local lawyer. That's it. No big national support, no money pouring in, no media plan. Their goal wasn't some grand mission to change America. Honestly, they were just trying to survive, to be treated like human beings in the world they had to live in. So what exactly was the fight about? Well, it wasn't this big, obvious, in-your-face injustice. It was something way more sneaky. The whole case hinged on a single, local rule that, on the surface, looked totally harmless. And that's where things get really interesting. And this is the whole shebang right here. You've got two versions of the same rule. The official rule, just a neutral local regulation. The town officials would just say, oh, that's just legal tradition, the way we've always done it. But the rule in practice, well, that was a totally different story. It was a tool. It was used one way for white people and a completely different way for Black people. It was a quiet but brutally effective way to keep segregation going. It's a perfect example of how discrimination can hide right out in the open. All right, so let's go inside the courtroom. This whole thing played out behind closed doors. No audience. But you can just imagine the tension in that room. It was thick. The future of this family, this community, and maybe even more was hanging on what was about to happen in that silent room. Think about it. No cameras, no reporters, just the key players in this incredibly high-pressure bubble. And outside that room, a whole community was watching, silently, holding its breath. The judges, man, they were under immense pressure. They knew they weren't just deciding the fate of one family. They were making a call that could ripple out and challenge systems of control everywhere. So yeah, every single word spoken in that room carried real, heavy consequences. And then the ruling came down. It wasn't some long, complicated decision. It was short, to the point, and unbelievably powerful. The court said, no. No, you can't enforce this rule in a discriminatory way. And just like that, the town's power to use these neutral laws for ugly purposes was weakened. Rights were expanded, right then and there. But there were no celebrations, no cheering in the streets. It was just change. Deep, fundamental change happening in the quietest way imaginable. So the verdict is in, but the story doesn't end there. In fact, what happens next is just as crucial. That decision, made in that one quiet courtroom, started to create this silent shockwave, and it started to spread. Yeah, this timeline lays it all out. So first, you have the ruling. A quiet but super powerful precedent is set. Then, this is what's so wild. Other towns start to notice. They see the writing on the wall, and they start quietly changing their similar rules, because they don't want to get sued next. Then, lawyers in other states start referencing this little-known case in their own arguments.
The whole system was starting to shift, one tiny piece at a time, completely under the radar. But as time went on, the story just kind of faded away, as bigger, louder court cases took center stage. And that's the big question, isn't it? If this case was such a big deal, why on earth has almost no one heard of it? How did a story this important get almost totally erased?
Well, the reasons are actually pretty simple, but they tell us a lot. For one, there was no famous leader involved, no big name to attach to the story. There were no dramatic protests for the cameras, and yeah, it got completely overshadowed by those huge, landmark Supreme Court cases that came later. At the end of the day, it just didn't fit the typical story we like to tell about how history gets made.
And that right there is the whole point. We're drawn to the loud moments, aren't we? The big marches, the epic speeches. But what this story shows us is that history is also made in the quiet places. It's forged in silent courtrooms by people with unspoken courage, and in decisions that the news never even covers.
You see, the battle for civil rights wasn't just one big event. It was this long, slow process, built brick by brick, one case at a time. Some of those fights happened in silence. Some happened in fear. And some, well, some, like this one, were almost forgotten entirely. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many other stories like this are out there? How many other silent precedents are just waiting to be found?